This is the brand new Apple iPad Pro M4 13-inch with Nano Texture display. And I spent way more money than I should have on this device. But was it worth it? Let's find out in today's video. In case you're wondering, it was $2,000 before tax. So, ended up being closer to like $2,300. I absolutely love my job, but I find myself getting really stressed all the time with work, with life, and everything in between. Sometimes it's hard to process things. And that's why I started using the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. Regardless of if you have a clinical mental health condition or you're just a human going through a hard time, BetterHelp can give you the tools to approach life in a different way. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. Hey, finding a therapist can be hard, especially when you're limited to just the people in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online and remote, and in order to find this therapist, they just have you fill out a couple questions to pair you with a professional therapist in as little as just a few days. So check out BetterHelp by visiting betterhelp.com/techfowler. If you use that link, you get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And I can tell you from personal experience that the therapist that BetterHelp connected me with has really given me a lot of tools to handle stress in ways that I never thought of before. And because finding a therapist is kind of like dating, if you don't like the fit with your therapist, which happens all the time, you can easily switch out without worrying about additional costs or insurance or anyone being out of network. BetterHelp can help you with whatever you're going through, whether it's stress with everyday life or something else. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link at the top of the description below or go to betterhelp.com/techfowler. And once again, huge thank you to BetterHelp for supporting the channel. The brand new iPad Pro is really exciting in a lot of different ways. The first way is that this iPad hasn't actually been updated since the last iPad release back in 2022. So there's actually been almost a 2-year gap between the last iPad Pro release and this one, which means that the jump from the last one to this one, while not huge, is bigger than it would have been if there had been a release last year. And I've got to say, I like this cadence of new iPad Pros coming out every other year better than every year because it makes the pill of spending $2,000 on a new iPad to review for you guys a little bit easier to swallow when it's not double that. So that's the first good thing. I bought the last iPad Pro right when it came out and I got 2 good years of usage from it, and I sold it for like maybe $400 less than I bought it for, which yes, is a decent amount less, but for 2 years of constant usage, not terrible. And that's basically what I do with all my personal tech. Whenever a new one comes out, if I feel like it's a big enough upgrade, I'll sell my old one and get the new one, and I do that with pretty much everything. My laptops, my phones, my iPads, even my cameras. I do it all the time. Not only does it help cover some of the costs of the new thing that I'm getting, but it also helps me not get too attached to my devices, which is important. All that said though, there are a lot of new, really great things about the new iPad Pro 13-inch M4. I'm specifically talking about this one because this is the only one that I had. I spent $2,000 on it. I wasn't also gonna buy the Air and a non-nano textured version of this device because I just don't want to spend $5,000 on new iPads. I feel like that's a little bit unnecessary. That being said, the reason that I sprung for this device, the $2,000 version of this device rather than the $1,200 or $1,300 version of the device, is because I wanted to try out the Nano Texture display. And as someone who does a lot of design work on Wacom tablets and even my older iPad, I really wanted to see if this new Nano Texture display was good for drawing. And after using this device for a week, I've got to say I love the Nano Texture display. I think it's awesome, but it's not as awesome for drawing as I was hoping. But we'll get into that later on in the video. First, let's talk about some of the other features that make the iPad Pro 13-inch M4 great. So in my opinion, the biggest change between this iPad Pro and the previous iPad Pro is the new Tandem OLED display. Apple replaced the older mini LED technology for Tandem OLED technology, which essentially is 2 OLED screens put on top of each other, which actually help with the brightness of the display because OLEDs don't get as bright as other screen technologies. And I've got to say, this screen is actually surprisingly bright. In a lot of cases, as bright, if not brighter than my old iPad. Unfortunately, like I said, I don't have it here to compare for the video, but I've seen them side by side and it's decent. As far as brightness goes, this Ultra Retina XDR display, which is what Apple officially calls this display, it gets up to 1600 nits of brightness at peak brightness using HDR, all that sort of good stuff, which is very bright. And I've used this tablet outside and it's decent. I mean, it's still somewhat difficult to see in the sun, but that is helped with the Nano Texture display. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video, but it's definitely better than I would have expected. But diving a little bit more into the screen comes in at 2752 by 2064 pixel resolution with a PPI of 264. Not only that, it's got the ProMotion display, so it's 120 Hz capable, which means it's buttery smooth. But these are all things that are really nice, but they're not brand new for the iPad. At least they don't feel that new. The Tandem OLED is really the most exciting thing about this screen. Because this is an OLED screen, you are getting some of the benefits of an OLED screen. Essentially, true blacks and really great contrast. And man, watching things on this display is amazing. I mean, specifically on the glossy screen, the standard version of the screen, the blacks are incredibly true black. They're very inky, and the contrast is amazing. Not only that, the color accuracy on this display is incredible. This display is light years ahead of what you get on the iPad Air, but not a huge improvement over what you get on the previous iPad Pro. Tech-wise it is, but when you actually look at them next to each other, the difference is not as crazy as you would think. So if you have an older version of the iPad Pro, the 2022 model of the device, and you want to upgrade to this version specifically just for the screen, might not be worth it. Unless you really feel like you need to brag about your Tandem OLED screen, or what does Apple call it? The Ultra Retina XDR display? What is stupid. Speaking of pricing, unfortunately it is still ridiculous. The cheapest 13-inch iPad Pro starts at $1299. That comes with 256 gigabytes of storage, the Wi-Fi only version. There are two color options, the space gray and the silver. Obviously prices would go up if you want to get the Wi-Fi cellular version of the device, plus you gotta pay a monthly fee for the cellular. The next step up is 512 gigabytes and it comes in at $1499. Insane. And then the version that I bought, the 1 terabyte version, comes in at $1899 to start, which is almost unbelievable, not including the Nano Texture or the Wi-Fi cellular. There's also a 2 terabyte version, which starts at $2299. Now, if you want to get the Nano Texture, it's a $100 add-on, which doesn't include the cellular add-on. That's a completely different thing. And you can only buy the Nano Texture display if you're buying the 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte device. So I purchased the 1 terabyte because I wanted the Nano Texture, bought the Nano Texture, and it came in at a retail price of, like I said, $2,000 before tax. Now, you can spec this device up if you really want to 2 terabytes, Nano Texture, and cellular, and that brings you up to around $2,600, which is unbelievable for an iPad, but you can do it. And I say all that to say that this new iPad Pro is incredibly expensive. But as someone who does a lot of design work on their iPad and also reviews products, I spent the extra $700 to get the Nano Texture display. Now, if I were just buying an iPad for myself just to use without reviewing it and without being interested in the Nano Texture display, I would have gone for the 256 and spent $1,300 and saved $700. But like I said, reviewing the product, reviewing the display, and using it for art, I wanted to try it out. I wish they had just offered the Nano Texture option on all the Pro models. I would have spent $1,400. But no, unfortunately, only the 1 terabyte version of the device. That being said, one thing that they don't actually really advertise about the 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte versions of the iPad Pro 13-inch is that they actually feature slightly better internals than the standard iPad Pro 13-inch. The 256 gigabyte and 512 gigabyte versions of the iPad Pro come with a 9-core CPU with 3 performance cores and 6 efficiency cores, whereas the 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte versions of the iPad Pro 13-inch come with a 10-core CPU with 4 performance cores and 6 efficiency cores. Oh, and the 256 and 512 only come with 8 gigabytes of RAM, and the more expensive 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte versions of the device come with 16 gigabytes of RAM. But let's be honest, are you gonna need it? Probably not. It really does depend on your use case, and I think if you are doing things like editing videos on your iPad, sure, might be worth it. But if you're using it as a media consumption device, probably not for $700 extra. All right, but continuing on, this new iPad Pro, specifically the 13-inch version, is actually the thinnest Apple product ever, according to Apple, which is really interesting to see because I think they're probably not too off base with that. It's an incredibly thin device. It's actually thinner than the Apple Pencil, which is unbelievable. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I definitely had some concerns with durability when I first unboxed this device because I was like, this is crazy thin. You could probably break this by flexing it. And since this device has come out, there have been videos by people like Jerry Rig Everything of flexing the device. And surprisingly, this device is more durable than I think most people thought. And the main reason for that is because there's actually a spine running down the center of the device long ways. So bending it like this is not gonna do too much. However, bending it like this may. So I'm not as worried about the durability of the iPad Pro 13-inch as I was before seeing all this information, but it is sometimes a little scary holding this thing without the case on it and feeling how thin it is, because I mean, it is crazy, crazy thin. Now, one thing you may or may not know is that if you're buying the 11-inch version of the iPad Pro, it is not as thin as the 13-inch version because obviously there's not enough room to put all your tech in there. So if you want the super thin version, you gotta go for the 13-inch, which again is the very expensive iPad Pro. But hey, if you care about thinness, it might be worth the extra money. It's hard to say that, but it might be true. Another big improvement is the jump from the M2 chip in the previous iPad Pro to the M4 chip in this iPad Pro. It is unnecessarily fast. There's not a lot of situations that I found myself utilizing, or really anyone can find themselves utilizing, the full power of the M4 chip with iPad OS. It's not an operating system that really allows you to do as much as I think, Mac OS does. There are 3D softwares that you can run on the system, which sure, that could probably, really use some of those M's that you got in there. You could do Final Cut editing, which again, use some of those M's. The point I'm trying to make is that an iPad, while being amazing and incredible at what it does, it is still not, in my opinion, a full computer replacement. All that aside, it sounds like I'm being really negative. I didn't go into filming this review trying to be negative, and I'm not being negative. This device is awesome. It's amazing in a bunch of different ways, but I'm just telling you what I genuinely think about it. One big benefit of the M4 chip is the AI capabilities. You can really do a lot of cool AI stuff eventually on this chip. It's specifically built for that. My Mac that I edit all my videos on This is a $5,000 Mac that I purchased. I actually have another channel, my main channel, my sneaker channel, and I edit videos all the time on that device. I know I don't drop as many videos on this channel as often, but I drop like 3 to 4 videos on that channel a week. So I'm editing all the time, so I wanted to spring for a crazy Mac. But I say all that to say that my crazy Mac that I bought at the end of last year only has an M3 chip. The M4 is only available on the iPad Pro currently, no other device. So it's kind of wild to see. Performance-wise, from what I've seen, it's not a huge jump over the M3. However, it is a pretty large jump over the M2. So if you do have the older iPad Pro and you want to do a lot of like really intensive stuff, a lot of crazy work, a lot of grinding, then maybe get the M4. But for my own personal use cases, playing some games on this thing, some pretty graphically intensive games, I'm not gonna lie, and drawing and watching YouTube, I probably don't need the M4 chip. But hey, let's talk about some of the games. I played a good amount of games on this device, which I don't usually do on my iPad. I usually play directly on my consoles, on my PC, or on my phone. But I did play Call of Duty Mobile. I was awesome. To be fair, I was using a controller, which you can do on the iPad, which I don't think a lot of people were, which probably gave me an unfair advantage. As you can see, I'm MVP every round, absolutely killing it. It was sweet, and it ran amazingly well on this iPad. To be fair, the iPad was complete overkill, but still. I tried out Stumble Guys, which is absolutely a Fall Guys clone, but still a lot of fun. Again, using the controller. I did try the on-screen controls, which were fine, and because this iPad is so much lighter than the previous iPad, it actually was pretty easy to hold, and I didn't get that tired. There were other games that I tried, like Real Racing 3, which is a pretty graphically intensive game, and it looked good. I mean, it didn't look console quality, but it looked really, really good. I don't think that's the fault of the iPad. I think that's the fault of the game developers, because they're trying to create a game that works on all the different Apple devices, so it can't be like the most amazing thing in the world. However, I did do a lot of PlayStation Remote Play. You guys might have found my channel through the PlayStation Portal videos that I did. It's a device that I absolutely love. I just had a daughter and I can't go and play my PlayStation on the TV downstairs at all, really. So what I do is I use my PlayStation Portal and I play games on that, and I get my PlayStation experience in bed or wherever it is that I'm sitting maybe on the couch. Now, what I loved about this device is that you can connect your PlayStation controller to the iPad and then also use Remote Play, and you're basically getting the same exact experience, in some cases even less laggy than on the PlayStation Portal, on a much bigger screen. Now, to be fair, this is a $2,000 or I guess $1,300 device if you buy the cheapest one, and the PlayStation Portal is like $200. So it's a pretty big price gap. Sure, you can use Remote Play on your iPhone, and I think I would prefer to use the PlayStation Portal for Remote Play versus my iPhone. But when it came to using an iPad with the PlayStation controller, that was by far the best way to do it. And I might even sell the PlayStation Portal now that I have this, because this is great. But hey, I spent $2,000 on a tablet. Hopefully it would be better than using the PlayStation Portal. Another welcome change on the iPad Pro is moving the FaceTime or front-facing camera from the top of the device to the side, which means it's much more natural when you're taking FaceTime calls. You also have Face ID on this side, so when you're unlocking your iPad, I've got to say Face ID is amazing. It's very, very quick, but you hold the iPad like this. You can also unlock like this, but I found a couple times that my hand will cover up the Face ID camera. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but I definitely think it's better to have the camera on the long side of the device rather than on the short side, or have it horizontally mounted rather than vertically mounted. It's just significantly better. You've still got quad stereo speakers. They sound amazing. They don't really sound that different, if at all different, from the previous iPad Pro. Very similar experience. You also still have a similar battery. The battery apparently is larger, but it gives you the same battery life of, they say, 10 hours. I was getting a decent amount less, but also I was gaming on it, playing YouTube on it, doing a lot of like drawing on it. And I think for that I was getting like 6 hours, 5 hours. I didn't really record all of it. I should have, but I was trying so many different things. I just didn't think it was fair to kind of give it 1 hour rating, because it really depends on your use case. The camera on the back, in my opinion, doesn't even exist. I've never used it once. I did use it for this review. It's fine. It's 12 megapixels. It's got LiDAR, so you can do some cool AR stuff if you're into that, but it is completely useless. And if you're one of those people that takes pictures on your iPad, please stop. So all the things that we've talked about to this point pretty much apply to all of the iPad Pro 13-inch M4s. It's an all-around incredible device. My one gripe is that it is very expensive, even more so than previous generations of the iPad Pro. I do think if you don't have an iPad Pro, it's worth the money. If you have the most recent generation of the iPad Pro, probably not worth it. But I do want to get into the Nano Texture display, which is sort of the main selling point for me on this $2,000 iPad versus the 256 gigabyte $1,300 iPad. And I wanted to talk about some of the benefits of it, some of the problems I had with it, and how it was for art. So the Nano Texture display is really interesting because it's not a coating that they applied to the top of the device. It's actually a texture that they applied at a nano level, if you will, to the screen that actually makes it a matte display. And interestingly enough, they actually still gave you the glossy borders, which I think was done on purpose specifically to show you the difference between the Nano Texture display and the glossy screen. And I've got to say that this Nano Texture display is awesome. I really, really love it. Now, I will say I don't love it for the reason that I thought that I was originally going to love it, but now that I've had it for about a week, I don't think I would trade in this iPad for the cheaper one, even though it would be nice to have an extra $700. So initially I was very excited about the Nano Texture display because I thought it was going to feel more like paper than a standard iPad screen. Now unfortunately, it doesn't. It doesn't feel like a Wacom screen, which is definitely rougher. It doesn't feel like the screen protectors, the paper-like screen protectors that you put on your older iPad Pros. It just feels like a smoother version of the gloss screen. And the reason for that is that your fingers don't really get stuck on it the way that they do on a gloss screen. You can even feel that with a Nano Texture display. If you slide your finger down a gloss screen, it kind of catches here and there. I think you guys understand what I mean. On the matte, it's just a smooth glide the whole way. And then if you go over to the gloss, sticky. Smooth. But realistically, that's not the reason why you'd get the Nano Texture display. The reason you would get the Nano Texture display is to help diffuse glare. And for someone like me, who records a lot of videos in my studio, the glare can be a problem, specifically when I'm filming B-roll. Now, I did take this device outside. Like I said, I no longer have the older iPad, so I used my phone, which has a screen protector on it. I know it looks incredibly scratched, but that's a screen protector, to kind of show you a difference between the glare outside on a non-Nano Texture display versus a Nano Texture display. It's kind of a I wouldn't say it's a night and day difference. It's like a day and then slightly less day experience. It does a really good job of diffusing light, and you really notice that in studio lighting. Like you can see the glare from the ring light on the edges of the device versus the Nano Texture display. It does a great job of diffusing the light. And if you're using this iPad a lot outdoors, I feel like it's a must. It really does help a lot. Also, something else that's cool about the Nano Texture display is that it gets less fingerprints. Now, there's a lot of fingerprints on there because I've been testing this thing like crazy, but it does show fingerprints less than the gloss display, which I really like. However, there are some problems with this Nano Texture display. The first is that in order to clean it, you either have to use the included Apple cleaning cloth, which they say to not use that often, which is hilarious because you're gonna have to clean it a decent amount, or kind of wipe it with your hand. You're not supposed to use your shirt, you're not supposed to use other cleaning cloths, you're supposed to only use the Apple one, or, smudge it with your finger. Because the Nano Texture display is literally a texture on the screen, and apparently it can get damaged. Now, one concern that I saw brought up online a lot, and something that I was genuinely concerned about, is whether the Apple Pencil would actually scratch or damage the Nano Texture display. And at first I was like, wow, that actually might be a concern. Like, my Wacom tablet has gotten scratched over time, but I've been using it for a couple of years. But then I thought, why would Apple create a product that doesn't work with another product that it sells with that product? Now, there are definitely situations where companies have done that, where they create a product and then they create an accessory and the accessory actually hurts the product. But in this case, I didn't find that. I used this for a week. I've been drawing on this every single day, and I do not see, I might see one scratch. Actually, no, I don't. No, I don't. I don't see one scratch. And I'll be honest, I was kind of mashing on the display. The display was even flexing sometimes, but there's no scratches. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if over time scratches did develop from using the Apple Pencil, or something else kind of gets in there and kind of scratches it up a bit. It's probably less scratch resistant than the gloss. I don't have any evidence to support that, but that would just be my guess. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens over time, and unfortunately scratches are not covered by AppleCare, but it's definitely not as scratch prone as I think everyone was expecting. So if you're planning on getting the Nano Texture iPad Pro, don't worry about scratches, at least not immediately with the Apple Pencil, because I didn't have any issues and I really went to town on it. Now, one downside of the Nano Texture display is because it was specifically designed to diffuse light, it does do that in both directions. Now, definitely not anywhere near as bad as I think people were thinking with the light coming up from the display, but it does make things ever so slightly fuzzier than the glossy display. Barely noticeable, but you can notice it. The one thing that I definitely did notice is that on all white screens, let me pull up a white background here, there is some very, very, very light, like blue speckling, like ever so slight. You can only really see it in person, but it does kind of look how it would look if it had a lightly matte screen protector on it. And unfortunately, because that's the screen, that's just what you get. You only notice it on all white screens or on areas where there's some text on white backgrounds. It's not a huge deal. It doesn't bother me personally, but it might bother you. If you're using this only for media consumption, don't get the Nano Texture. You won't get any of that sort of blueness, the blue speckling, and you'll get the better inky blacks on the standard glossy display because it just looks better with the OLED. So that's something to keep in mind. But when it comes to using this tablet outside or in bright light settings, it does an incredible job of reducing glare. And personally, even though I do watch media on this device, I don't mind it. I actually kind of like it. It really makes the viewing experience, I don't know, more immersive in a way, because you don't have the glare, especially when you're sitting next to a window. Like, you don't have glare on your screen. It's incredible. Like right now with all the studio lights, I don't have glare on what I'm looking at. It's amazing. Yes, things have a very, very slight fringe to them. Very, very slight. And yes, there is that sort of blue speckling, again, very slight. But for me personally, I would take the trade-off because I love this matte display. Now I will say that the reason I bought this display was specifically for art and for drawing and for sketching and things like that. I own a sock company. I do a lot of sock design work on my tablet. And unfortunately, when it came to drawing on this device, the matte display is not exactly what I expected. I prefer it to the standard glossy display, but it just doesn't have that same sort of scratch or drag feeling that you have on paper or a matte display or something like that. It's as smooth as a standard glossy display. That being said, the matte makes it look like paper, which I really like. I love that actually. And the Nano Texture display also does something which I didn't expect, which allows your hand to slide very seamlessly across the screen while you're drawing. Your hand doesn't get stuck like it does on the gloss display. That for me is a huge benefit, one that I didn't even realize when I bought this display. If I'm drawing some clouds on this thing and my hand is kind of moving across the screen, it doesn't get stuck. It feels super, super smooth, like a piece of paper would. So no, while the screen doesn't feel like paper underneath the pen tip, it is a better screen for drawing, in my opinion. Also, this will probably end up being a sock. So socks designed by iPad, coming your way. If you want to check out any of the products that we've made at Apothecary, specifically socks, hats, pretty much broke stuff, check us out through the link in the top of the description below. I co-founded it a couple years ago. I'm a huge sneakerhead, if you guys know me from my main channel, and I wanted to create a product that goes well with sneakers. And as an industrial designer, socks just made perfect sense. So I teamed up with a good friend of mine, another industrial designer, and we created Apothecary. And I don't really talk about it much on this channel because we don't talk about socks that much, but if I'm designing socks on an iPad, might as well give it a little bit of a plug. So check out Apothecary, links in the description below. We make the best socks ever. We're in Zoomies if you want to check us out, so check out Apothecary. Now, while we're talking about drawing, why don't we talk about the Apple Pencil Pro? Now, this is the new Apple Pencil that only works with the new iPad Air and, of course, the new iPad Pros. Now, this pencil does have some features that the older Apple Pencils didn't have. First is barrel roll, which allows you to turn the pencil and it knows which direction it's turning. So if you're using like a flat nib, it can allow you to turn the nib in different ways. It also has haptic feedback, so you can squeeze the pencil and feel it. It feels like a button. It opens up some little menus depending on which application you're using. And it's got hover, which is great. I don't use it that often, but you got it. Now, you can actually use one of the previous Apple Pencils, not all of them, only the Apple Pencil USB-C, and that's because they changed the magnets on the top of the device, so the older magnetic Apple Pencil won't work, but the USB-C one, because you don't need magnets, will work. So if you want to spring for the older pencil, I would say just go for the Pro. It's 129 bucks. It's the same price as the other Apple Pencil, not the USB-C, but the other magnetic Apple Pencil. Definitely worth it. It's a great all-around device. I actually think it's one of the best parts of the iPad Pro, and if you don't buy the Apple Pencil, you might not even need to buy the iPad Pro. Actually, the iPad Air, because it uses this new Apple Pencil, you might still not even need to buy the iPad Pro. That being said, this pencil feels amazing, the accuracy is incredible, and I've actually completely switched to using iPad over my Wacom tablet or Wacom tablet because I just think it's a better experience overall. So, Wacom, you gotta figure it out, man. They're coming for you and they're killing it. But that's really all I've got to say about the iPad Pro 13-inch M4 Nano Texture. A very specific review for a very specific person, but hopefully you watched all the way through. We are very close to 100,000 subscribers. Make sure to hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't yet. And before we end the video, I do want to tell you whether I think the iPad Pro 13-inch M4 Nano Texture is worth it. In my opinion, if you can use this for what it's supposed to be used for, which is outdoor applications, or you need extreme power, or maybe you want to use it as an art device, yes, I think it's worth it. However, if you don't need to do all those things, or maybe you do want to do some of those things like, you know, edit videos or do art or whatever on your iPad Pro, but you just don't want like the top of the line experience, the other iPad Pros are going to be great for you. Even the 11-inch, great. No issues there whatsoever. I just think the iPad Pro in general is an excellent product. Do I think it's worth the extra money? Yes, if you could get it for the 256 gigabyte version. That's what I would have done. No question. I wouldn't have sprung for this 1 terabyte version. I don't need the extra power. I just would have gone for the Nano Texture. Unfortunately, it's only available for the 1 terabyte. So if you need that great glare reduction, then sure, spend the extra money. But if you don't waste it. So to simplify things, iPad Pro, worth it. Nano Texture iPad Pro, worth it for certain people. But that pretty much wraps up the review for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you all in the next one.